If you've ever found yourself trapped inside that horrifying, creaky old house with those two hunting you down, you definitely know the name Granny. It's an intense game of survival, for sure, but the real story behind all that horror, it's way more tragic and twisted than you could ever imagine. So let's dig in and uncover the dark history that created these monsters.
So who are these two really? I mean, were they always like this? And how in the world do they connect to other huge horror icons like Slenderman and Slendrina? Well, we're about to unravel the complete, and I mean complete, dark history of Granny's entire family. But before we jump back in time, let's just quickly remember the stakes here. The moment you're inside that house, that clock starts ticking. You've got just 5 days to get out. 5 days! With traps everywhere and a constant, looming threat. That time limit is everything. It's your only hope and your countdown to absolute doom.
You know, to really understand the monster, you have to understand the woman she used to be. Because Granny wasn't born evil, not even close. Her life, long before any of the horrors of the game, was just defined by an almost unbelievable string of tragedies.
This timeline right here, it just lays out an incredible foundation of loss. As a kid, Granny literally watched her own father get murdered in the very same cottage that would later become her prison. Then, years later, after she finds a bit of happiness and moves back into that same home with her new husband, history just repeats its cruelty. She finds him, Grandpa, dead in the woods nearby, only 3 years after they got married. You can just feel how that house was already soaked in sorrow long before any curse showed up.
But her own personal tragedy, that was only the beginning. It soon spiraled into this full-blown generational curse, a cycle of violence that pulled in her kids, her grandkids, and twisted them all into something monstrous. This is where the bloodline gets really dark.
Okay, this family tree really shows how all the pieces connect. At the top, of course, you've got Granny. She had a daughter, Helena, who also went by Angelina. Helena married a guy named Simon, and they had a daughter, Slendrina. And then Slendrina eventually married this character known only as the Fun Guy. Every single one of these names is a key part of the puzzle, and trust me, each one has a pretty dark destiny.
So who's Slenderman in this whole universe? Well, that's Simon, Granny's son-in-law. Turns out his wife Helena was carrying a curse. Maybe she was a witch, it's a little unclear. And it was her curse that transformed this normal guy, Simon, into the terrifying Slenderman we all know, forcing him to leave his family and just live out in the woods. And then we've got the Fun Guy. He's a really interesting curveball in a family that's all about supernatural curses. See, he's a man of science, and he's completely obsessed with one thing: figuring out how to turn people into vampires. His scientific ambition, as you can imagine, was about to find a very strange home amongst all this dark magic.
So, with this whole cursed family history as the backdrop, the story now zooms in on the granddaughter, Slendrina. It's really her actions that light the fuse for the final, horrifying transformation of this entire family. You know, growing up in the shadow of her mom's curse, Slendrina didn't shy away from the supernatural. No, she ran straight towards it. She got this deep, dark obsession with black magic, completely convinced she could harness its power for herself.
And in her search, she found exactly what she was looking for: a satanic book. And it promised her everything she wanted, all this incredible power. But, like always, that kind of power comes with a terrible, terrible price.
The book demanded the ultimate sacrifice. The price for all that power? She had to sacrifice her own 3-year-old daughter. And in her hunger for power, she actually went through with it.
That one single horrific act of betrayal down in the basement of the family home, that becomes the catalyst for everything. That is the exact moment that turns a grieving old woman into the monster we now know as Granny. You can see her whole transformation happen in 4 just awful steps. First, Granny witnesses the entire sacrifice. When Slendrina realizes she's been seen, she shows zero mercy. She locks her own grandmother in a room in the basement to starve to death. But right when Granny's on the verge of death, the spirit of her murdered great-granddaughter appears, and that spirit does two things. It frees Granny, and it grants her the dark, supernatural powers she uses today.
So, now she's powerful, and she's cruel. And the very first thing Granny does is go looking for her lost love. Using the power she was just gifted, she brought her husband, Grandpa, back from the dead. But because he'd been gone for so many years, he didn't come back right. He returned as this hollow, zombie-like creature, the very same Grandpa we see in the game.
So, what happened to everyone else in this completely shattered family? I mean, by the time Granny emerged with all her new powers, the house was totally empty. So let's take a look at the final fates of every single member of this cursed bloodline. Alright, so here's the final rundown. Granny and Grandpa obviously became the monstrous guardians of the house. Helena, Granny's daughter, had actually died from her curse years earlier. Her husband Simon, now Slenderman, had already vanished into the forest. Slendrina disappeared without a trace after her terrible act. And the fun guy? Well, he eventually succeeded in his research and became a vampire. A whole family of monsters, every one of them born from a different kind of tragedy. And that leaves us with one last really haunting question. The entire story, everything, hinges on the spirit of that murdered great-granddaughter. Was she just an innocent soul, giving her great-grandmother the power to get revenge? Or was her gift something way more sinister? The birth of a new, deeper evil that now controls everyone and everything inside that cursed house.